Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Eric Hughes here. In today's video, we're going to be continuing our conversation about fascia yet again and mobilizing through different planes of movement. Today's plane of movement that we're going to be discussing is the horizontal or transverse plane. This is where we get all of our rotational movements. In stechofascial manipulation, this is internal and external, extra and interrotation. Just like the lateral side-to-side movements in the frontal plane, rotational movements are just as prevalent and just as important in our sports in terms of performance, but also in terms of even pain reduction. The most common application would probably be hockey or baseball or golf, where you're rotating through the hips to get that rotational power all the way from your feet, through the hips, through the spine, into the upper body, right? Creating that pendulum to generate the power into the object that you're hitting. Rotational movements also show up in some very common movements that you wouldn't necessarily think about either. So if we take into account squatting mechanics, just a regular air squat, biomechanically what you should be doing is rotating and almost driving your feet into the ground. And what that does is create that wrapping sensation, that tension around the legs, into the knees, into the hips. So you have the whole leg and the rest of the lower body engaged in that squatting movement. And yes, it is prevalently a sagittal movement where you're moving up and down, but it's that rotational force that gives you that proper positioning and power to get out of the hole. So again, let's take training in the gym, for example. What exercises can you list that you do on a regular basis that focus on the transverse plane through these rotational movements? The answer is probably going to be not many, right? The only one I can think of is when you're holding a medicine ball, or if you're holding a kettlebell and you're up on your butt and you're rotating side to side and you're just fatiguing your muscles and all you're doing is really working your hip flexors and you're not getting any much done, right? When do we ever focus on rotation through the cervical spine, the thoracic spine, the rest of the spine, our wrists, our elbows, our feet, our knees, right? All these joints that need this rotational component, within their means, right? They fascially are just as important as any other muscle in the body, right? So what I'm going to be doing now is showing you a handful of revolution and motion exercises that goes through all these key parts throughout the body to emphasize rotational movements and, again, mobilizing through that plane of movement, but also fascially speaking as well. So let's go ahead and get to it. So as I go throughout displaying each exercise, we're going to start pretty small and kind of work into bigger, more grandiose, more complex movements and really highlighting mobilization through each body part. This one, for example, we're focusing on the feet because we're on a slant board, toes downhill, but what I'm focusing on is rotating and encouraging rotation through the ankle, through the knee, through the hip, all the way through the rest of the body by tossing that ball side to side. Another tool that we use to work the feet or train the feet are pipes. And my toes are pigeon-toed on the pipe, so toes pointed in. But what I'm doing is actually rotating and pointing my knees towards the camera. So again, you get that similar wrapping sensation that I mentioned in the squat. And then you roll the pipes in and out. So again, we're working on those rotational fascial lines and generating that power and torque and the feet and how the feet interact and connect with the pelvic floor and the rest of the body. Here's the opposite version of that, toes pointed out. And so what I'm focusing on here is wrapping my toes around the pipes as much as possible as I roll the pipes out, trying to keep my toes in contact with the pipes as well. Again, kind of the opposite of that rotational movement. Again, connecting the feet to that of the rest of the body while also incorporating a lot of balance and coordination, that neurological aspect, also important for sports. So now that we got done working with the feet, I'll show you some RevInMo movements for the wrists and hands. And so we're doing pouring in and pouring out with the bells. And so I'm using a little bit of weight, about 3 to 5 pounds, to help encourage that rotation to the end point of that internal and external rotation or supination and pronation of the wrist. And then here's what we would call figure eights. So kind of combining all together at once. Now if we want to move on to more centrally towards the body, this is called kneeling overhead twist. So I'm focusing on hollowing my abs and then twisting throughout my torso by moving the ball side to side using my hands. So that's that rotational component where I'm really feeling that stretch, specific to muscles in my lats, in my shoulders, and again, using them in such a way that we don't really emphasize in the gym. And the next movement here is called snake with rotation. The rotation occurs throughout that spine, throughout the hips. The main snake movement works in stabilizing and mobilizing the shoulders across the back of the rib cage, but then incorporating this rotational component, then you start getting that fascial remodeling throughout the thoracic and lumbar spine, and again into the hips. And you can start slowly seeing more and more integration with the whole body in that rotational component. The next exercise here is called sword pull, and this one is great for remodeling the shoulder and improving that connection, that communication between the front and the back of the shoulder. So muscle specific, we are working on lengthening and mobilizing the pec major and pec minor while focusing on the eccentric and slowing down portion of the muscles in the back of the shoulder as well. Also, fair to mention the stabilization component through the core and being feet focused as well. This is called knee side to side. So again, you have that shoulder stability, but now we're really working out that rotational component through the thoracic spine, through the lumbar spine, into the hips, into the knees. Other than my shirt slowly falling down onto my head, I mean, what else is there to say? You can see that rotational component and how I'm able to generate that force and that power. And the last exercise I'm going to show you is called scissors. And so now you can see, as I mentioned before, this is a full body movement. So I am working through those intra-rotation, extra-rotation lines, those rotational movements, that horizontal and transverse plane throughout the entire body, literally from my fingertips, pressing away with the floor, opening up the chest, all the way through the front of the core and down into the leg and toes.